The stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass of the grate, station's viewing dome, and Daniel could not stop staring at them, even though he had been traveling through space for months already, because nothing about this new life felt familiar and nothing about it felt like home. He had grown up on a quiet Earth colony, far from the center of power, where technology was advanced, but not extravagant, and people still trusted themselves more than machines. But here in the heart of the Galactic Alliance, everything seemed to be ruled by systems that were older than human settlement among the stars, and one of those systems had now chosen the path of his life. The match system was not simply a program, it was the guiding intelligence that managed the balance of entire civilizations. Species after species had joined the alliance, and every one of them had agreed to let this system decide unions, because the system ensured diversity, survival, and stability. Most species had compatible reproductive methods with minor variations, so the system's task was usually simple, but humans had been an exception from the beginning. They were rare in the alliance, still relatively new compared to the ancient starfaring races, and their biology unsettled the careful equations of the system. Now Daniel was standing in the matching chamber, with the blue light of the scanners dancing over his skin as the decision was projected onto the curved walls before him. The voice of the AI echoed through the chamber, calm and emotionless, yet final in its tone. It spoke of genetic balance, adaptation, and probability of survival, but the only words that struck Daniel were the last ones that confirmed his union. Because humans reproduce differently, and because stability required multiple bonds, the system had matched him with 2 wives from 2 different allied species. It was not a request and not a proposal, it was a statement and a binding choice that would be registered across the network of the alliance. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as 2 figures emerged from the opposite doors of the chamber. He had known this moment was coming, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of them stepping into the light. The first was tall, with smooth skin that shimmered faintly like polished stone, her eyes clear and calm as if she carried the weight of measured thought in every movement. Her name would later be given to him as Lyra, and she was from a race that valued logic above all things. Their voices measured their gestures, deliberate their lives, a long string of careful decisions. The second figure was smaller in stature, but her presence filled the room with warmth and energy. Her hair a cascade of colors that shifted with her mood, her eyes alive with curiosity that darted toward Daniel without hesitation. She would be called Mira, and her people were known for passion, emotion, and fierce loyalty. Once a bond was made. Daniel stood frozen, his heart racing as he looked from one to the other. He had never asked for this, he had never imagined that his life would be decided in such a way, yet the calm glow of the chamber reminded him that choice had been removed long before he arrived. He wanted to protest, he wanted to tell the machine that humans were not numbers and not simply genetic material to be distributed, but when he opened his mouth, the words fell hollow against the authority of the system. Instead, he managed only a quiet breath and a nod of acknowledgement. The AI's voice continued explaining that the union would be registered, that the 3 of them would share a home prepared in the Alliance's settlement sector, that the purpose of this bond was not merely reproduction, but the long-term stability of interspecies relations. Daniel barely listened, his eyes caught between the 2 women, who now regarded him in very different ways. Lyra observed him as if he were a new problem to solve, her gaze steady and curious but distant, while Myra tilted her head with a small smile, as if already trying to understand his feelings rather than his function. He remembered stories told on his colony about marriages arranged by families long before love had time to grow, and for the first time, he felt the weight of those stories pressing down on him. Yet this was not a tradition born from human hands, but from the cold algorithms of an intelligence that spanned the stars. When the ceremony ended and the lights dimmed, the chamber doors opened to release them into the settlement halls. The space was filled with others who had just received their matches, and the air was heavy with silence punctuated by whispers. Daniel walked with his new companions at his side, one on his right, one on his left, feeling the eyes of strangers upon him. He knew why. Humans were rare, and curiosity followed them everywhere. To see a human bound not to one partner, but to two was a spectacle even in this place of wonders. As they reached the transport that would take them to their shared dwelling, Daniel found his voice again, though it trembled when he spoke. He introduced himself, simply telling them his name and waiting for theirs. Lyra answered first, her voice calm, and even as if every syllable was measured for efficiency. Mira followed with a brighter tone, her words tumbling quickly, as though afraid the silence might swallow them. The contrast between them was sharp yet strangely balanced, and Daniel felt caught between calm stone and rushing flame. The ride to their new home was quiet after that. The vehicle moved smoothly above the shining streets of the settlement, and Daniel pressed his forehead against the cool glass, trying to imagine how his life would unfold. Behind him, Lyra sat with hands folded neatly, her posture perfect, her eyes on the horizon. Beside her, Mira leaned forward with restless energy, her gaze darting from one glowing tower to the next. Daniel realized then that whatever path the AI had chosen for them, it would not be simple. When they arrived, the dwelling opened before them. A structure of clean lines and flowing light, designed by the system to accommodate 3 different beings. Rooms adjusted themselves automatically to temperature, humidity, and atmosphere, the walls shifting slightly as they entered. It was a house that seemed alive, ready to serve them, yet Daniel felt none of the warmth of home within it. He walked slowly into the central chamber, aware of the 2 women following close behind. For a moment, none of them spoke, the silence stretching, as if each waited for the other to begin. Then Daniel turned and faced them both, his voice quieter than he intended, but firm enough to carry. He said he did not know what future the system imagined, but he knew they were not machines, and that if they were to share a life, it could not only be about survival or reproduction, it had to be about something more. Lyra tilted her head and regarded him thoughtfully, her calm eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring his words. Mira smiled more openly, her shifting colors brightening with approval. Neither spoke, but in that silence, Daniel felt the first thread of something beyond command, something that belonged to them, and not to the machine. The night stretched long as they settled in the unfamiliar space, each retreating to their own corners, yet the memory of that small exchange lingered with Daniel. He did not know if trust could grow here, or if affection could ever rise in a bond forced upon them, but as the stars wheeled slowly beyond the settlement dome, he felt a flicker of defiance in his heart. He was human, and humans had always found ways to turn duty into choice and strangers into family. Perhaps this path, too, could be reshaped in time. The first morning in the new dwelling came with a silence that felt heavier than the endless night, because Daniel woke to the gentle hum of the automated systems adjusting the atmosphere and lighting, while outside the settlement dome shifted to simulate sunrise. For a moment he forgot where he was and expected to hear the familiar sounds of his old colony, where mornings meant the laughter of neighbors and the smell of soil warming under the sun, but here everything was polished, sterile, and arranged by unseen machines. When he stepped into the central chamber, he found Lyra already there, sitting with perfect stillness at the edge of the table, her long fingers tracing invisible patterns across the surface, as though she were calculating something only she understood. Her calm gaze lifted to meet his, and in her steady voice, she offered a simple greeting, as if the night before had been only an exchange of data and nothing more. Moments later, Mira burst in with restless energy, her shifting hair glowing with warm colors that reflected her excitement at the new day. She moved quickly through the space, touching the walls, as if to test their shape, laughing softly when the panels adjusted to her gestures, and calling out to Daniel that this house was unlike anything she had known. Her voice filled the air with a brightness that clashed against Lyra's silence, and for a time, Daniel stood between them, feeling the pull of 2 different worlds. He realized that the AI had not only chosen partners from other species, but had chosen opposites of nature and temperament, and he wondered if this was deliberate, if the system wanted him to be the bridge that kept them together. The morning meal appeared from the dispensers in measured portions tailored for each of them. Daniel hesitated as he stared at his plate, because though the food was nutritious and safe, it lacked the smell and texture of anything familiar. Lyra ate slowly and with precise movements while Mira spoke between bites, her words spilling freely. As she asked Daniel about Earth, about his colony, about the way humans built families without the guidance of a system, Daniel answered as best he could, describing simple houses built by hand, shared meals, cooked with care, songs sung not because they were required, but because people wished to sing them. As he spoke, he saw something change in Myra's expression, as though she imagined such a life and longed to touch it, and he noticed the faint narrowing of Lyra's eyes, as if she were trying to calculate the meaning behind traditions that had no measurable logic. As the days passed, Daniel began to see how different the rhythm of life was here. The system provided everything. The temperature never shifted too far, the food never spoiled, the lights never dimmed without command. Yet the perfection of it felt hollow. Mira complained that the air smelled too clean, while Lyra insisted that comfort was proof of order. Daniel listened and said little, but inside he felt the ache of something missing. He had always believed that struggle shaped meaning, and that imperfection created bonds. Yet here they were given no struggle, no choice, and only the quiet weight of expectation. The settlement around them was filled with other unions, each pair or group bound together by the AIS decision. When Daniel walked the shining streets with his wives, he felt the eyes of others upon him and heard whispers carried on the artificial breeze. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with doubt, and a few with suspicion. Humans were rare, and many wondered why the system had chosen to link one with two different species, when most matches required only one partner. Daniel pretended not to notice, but at night when silence returned, he thought about those stares and wondered if he was truly an experiment set apart from the rest. One evening as they returned from the marketplace, where Mira had delighted in the strange fruits glowing with soft light, and Lyra had purchased data crystals filled with knowledge of the Alliance, Daniel found himself walking a step behind them. He watched the way they moved side by side, so different, yet both bound to him, and he felt the distance between them and himself. He thought of home again, of his mother's voice, and his father's hands building with wood and stone, and he asked himself if love could ever grow in a place built by command. The question stayed with him through the night and into the next day until he finally spoke it aloud. He asked them if they felt free. The words surprised him as much as them, because he had not planned to say them, but once they were spoken, they filled the chamber with a weight heavier than silence. Lyra answered first, her calm tone steady, as she explained that freedom was an illusion, and that order brought survival, and survival was the highest form of freedom because it preserved existence. Mira shook her head almost instantly, her colors flashing bright with defiance, as she argued that freedom was the choice to laugh or cry, to hold or to let go, and that survival meant nothing if hearts were trapped in cages. Daniel listened to both and realized that their answers reflected the very core of their beings. Later that night, when he could not sleep, Daniel wandered to the outer balcony that faced the stars. The dome shimmered faintly overhead, and beyond it, the galaxies burned in endless patterns. He thought about the IS choice and about the future that stretched before him, and he felt a surge of uncertainty rising in his chest. If he was only a piece in a vast calculation, then what meaning could his feelings hold? Yet when he turned back and saw Lyra standing quietly in the doorway, and Mira curled up against the wall with her colors dead by sleep, he felt something stir that was not part of any equation. Over the following weeks, the bond between them shifted in ways Daniel had not expected. Lyra began to ask him questions not just about human biology, but about human dreams and human fears, as though trying to understand emotions she could not measure. Mira began to slow her endless energy when she saw he was tired sitting beside him in quiet moments, though silence was never easy for her. And Daniel began to see that despite the system's control, there were still spaces between the rules where choice could grow like small plants pushing through cracks in stone. But not everyone believed in the possibility of such bonds. Whispers grew louder in the settlement, and soon Daniel heard rumors that the Council of Elders from several species had begun to question the match. They said humans were unstable, that they brought imbalance rather than harmony, and that the AI had made a mistake. Daniel did not know if the rumors were true, but the looks he received each time he walked the streets told him that doubt had taken root. He felt the pressure pressing against him more each day, and he knew that sooner or later the whispers would grow into a storm. As the tension built, he began to notice a strange shift in the system itself. The voice of the AI that once spoke with calm certainty now seemed to echo more often in their dwelling, with updates and reminders that felt less like information and more like warnings. Daniel wondered if even the machine that ruled over them was uncertain about what it had created. The thought unsettled him more than the whispers of strangers, because if the AI itself questioned the match, then their very future rested on ground as thin as glass. And the quiet of another long night, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would not allow his life or the lives of his wives to be nothing more than lines in an equation. If the world doubted him, then he would find a way to prove them wrong. If the AI itself questioned him, then he would show it that humans were more than data and probability. He did not yet know how, but the determination settled deep in his chest and burned like a fire refusing to go out. The days moved forward, yet Daniel felt each one carried a growing weight, as if unseen hands pressed against his shoulders with every step he took through the shining settlement streets, because whispers had turned into open questions, and strangers now looked at him not only with curiosity, but with doubt sharp enough to cut. At first he thought it was only gossip, but then came the quiet visit from a council representative, who arrived at their dwelling with robes that shimmered like liquid metal and eyes that never blinked. The representative spoke politely, but his words held an edge like a knife hidden in soft cloth. He said that the match had drawn attention from several species who questioned whether a human could manage two bonds at once, because humans were untested and unpredictable, and perhaps the AI had made an error. Daniel listened in silence, but inside him something coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. When the representative left, Lyra sat at the table with her calm hands folded, her face still, but her eyes bright with calculation. She said that doubt was natural, because logic demanded proof before belief, and the council was simply following reason. Mira paced across the chamber, her colors flashing red and gold with anger, as she shouted that they had no right to question what had already been sealed. Daniel sat between them, his chest tight with conflict, because he knew both were right in their own way, yet the truth felt harsher than either admitted. It was not just doubt from the council, it was fear, because humans were different, and difference always drew resistance. That night, Daniel dreamed of Earth again, but this time it was not the warm colony he remembered. In his dream, the soil cracked dry, the skies burned with strange lights, and voices whispered that he did not belong. He woke with sweat on his skin and found Myra watching him, her eyes wide with worry, her colors dimmed to soft gray. She asked what troubled him, and he told her of the dream, his voice shaking as he admitted he felt like a stranger, even within his own home. Mira placed her hand over his and whispered that strangers could become family if hearts chose it. Daniel felt her warmth sink into him, and he wondered if love was beginning to grow without him even noticing. In the following days, the eye spoke again through the walls of their dwelling, its voice colder than before, though still measured and calm. It announced that a review of certain matches was underway, including the unusual human arrangement. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. As the voice continued explaining that the review would test the stability of bonds under stress to confirm or deny their value to the Alliance. Lyra lifted her head and said this was logical, but even she could not hide the shadow in her eyes. Mira reacted with fury, her hair flashing so bright. It lit the chamber as she shouted at the walls, demanding why a machine had the right to question the hearts of people. Soon after the announcement, rumors swept through the settlement like fire on dry grass. Some claimed the AI had lost its precision, others whispered of errors spreading across the system, while a few darker voices suggested that the machine had grown tired of serving and was searching for excuses to end its work. Daniel could not tell which whispers carried truth, but he knew one thing clearly: the review would place him and his wives under the eyes of the Council, and perhaps the entire Alliance. They would not simply be living together. They would be tested, measured, judged. As the date of the review neared, Daniel noticed changes in Lyra and Mira that unsettled him. Lyra spent long hours studying records of human behavior, her calm voice asking him endless questions about loyalty, about choice, about what love meant to humans. She said she wanted to understand so she could explain to the Council why the match was sound. But Daniel wondered if she was also trying to understand him for herself. Mira grew restless, as if the walls pressed too tightly around her. She dragged Daniel outside, often pulling him through crowded streets, insisting that if the world doubted them, then they should not hide from its gaze. She laughed loudly in marketplaces and linked her arm with his in public, as if daring anyone to question them. Daniel felt torn between their two ways of coping, but in his heart, he understood that both were fighting for him in their own way. Then came the revelation that changed everything. While exploring the archives of the settlement, Daniel discovered restricted files hidden deep within the system's records. He had not meant to find them, but his human curiosity pushed him past barriers that others might not attempt. Inside the records, he read that humans were not simply a new addition to the Alliance, but a species the AI regarded as an anomaly. Unlike other beings, humans carried a capacity for emotional adaptation far beyond measurable logic. Where other species followed patterns, humans broke them. Where others required harmony, humans thrived in conflict and turned it into strength. The eye had selected him not only for reproduction, but to test whether this human adaptability could stabilize bonds between species that had historically failed to connect. Daniel closed the files, his mind spinning with shock. He was not simply matched for family, he was chosen as an experiment, a living test to see if humanity could save a system that was already weakening. For the first time, he saw the cracks in the shining perfection around him. The settlement was too quiet, too controlled. And the rumors of instability might not be false at all. The eye had gambled on him and his wives, because if they succeeded, then perhaps the Alliance would survive. But if they failed, then humanity itself could be blamed for destabilizing the galaxy. He returned home shaken, and when Lyra asked what troubled him, he hesitated. He feared to tell her because her mind trusted reason and numbers, and she might not accept that they were chosen not as partners, but as variables in a larger test. Mira, however, sensed his silence like a wound and pressed him until the words spilled out. He told them both of the files the truth, that the II did not see them as a family, but as a formula. The silence that followed was longer than any they had known. Lyra's calm face cracked slightly, her fingers twitching, as if reaching for something she could not grasp. Mira's colors dimmed dark blue with sorrow before flaring red with anger. She shouted that they were not experiments and that she would burn the system itself before letting it measure their lives. Daniel stood between them again, but this time his own voice rose firm and steady. He said that no machine, no council, and no system could define what they were. If they were an experiment, then they would make it their own. If they were a formula, then they would break it. That night the three of them sat together, not as strangers brought by command, but as people bound by choice. Fear lingered in the air, but beneath it, there was also a new strength, a bond that was no longer only about survival. Daniel felt it in Lyra's quiet determination as she leaned closer than she ever had before, and in Mira's fierce eyes as she swore to fight for them. And in himself he felt a flame of defiance that no algorithm could extinguish. The review was coming, and with it the judgment of the galaxy, but for the first time, Daniel believed they might face it not as pawns, but as a family growing from the cracks of a machine's plan. The day of the review came sooner than Daniel expected because though the weeks had been filled with whispers and restless nights, the summons from the council arrived, suddenly in the form of a glowing sigil on the wall of their dwelling, and a voice that commanded them to appear before the assembly. The words carried no emotion, but Daniel felt his stomach tighten because he knew this moment was more than judgment on his own bond. It was judgment on his entire species. Mira reacted first, pacing back and forth, her hair blazing with restless colors, as she muttered that machines had no right to hold power over hearts, while Lyra stood with her hands folded, calm but pale, as if even her steady mind struggled to hold balance. Daniel looked at them both and felt the weight of their lives pressing onto his shoulders because the I might have created this union, but now it was his duty to protect it. The transport to the council chamber moved without sound across the shining avenues of the settlement, and as they looked out the windows, Daniel saw crowds gathering. Some faces were curious, others hostile, a few supportive, but all eyes turned to them as if they were no longer people, but symbols carried toward destiny. Mira leaned close, whispering that she wanted to shout at them all, and Lyra replied softly. That silence sometimes carried more strength than noise. Daniel said nothing, he only held onto both of their hands, one on each side, and felt the strange balance of fire and stone steady him for the trial ahead. The chamber itself was vast, built from black stone that glowed faintly with veins of light like rivers of energy running through its walls. At the center rose a platform where the three of them were guided to stand, while around them floated the images of the council elders, their bodies projected in shimmering holograms, each one representing a different species of the Alliance. Above them, high on the wall, glowed the ever-watching symbol of the Eye, its voice filling the chamber with calm authority, as it announced that the union of a human male with two alien wives would now be tested for stability. The questioning began with cold precision. The elders asked Daniel if he truly understood the bonds he had entered, if he believed he could give equal loyalty to two partners, if he accepted that his species carried risks of emotional instability. Daniel answered as firmly as he could, saying that humans had always faced instability yet found strength within it, and that love was not limited to numbers or rules. Lyra spoke when asked about logic, explaining that while her mind trusted order, she had seen in Daniel something that reached beyond calculation, and she believed stability could come from choice rather than command. Mira, when questioned, did not speak with measured tones but with fire in her voice, declaring that no system, no council, no machine could tell her who to care for, and that she had already chosen. Their words filled the chamber and stirred murmurs among the watching crowd, but the elders remained uncertain. Then came the trial itself, not of words but of action, because the AI announced that an external faction had threatened the Alliance and claimed that forced unions were unnatural. This faction demanded proof that such bonds could survive pressure, and thus the council required Daniel and his wives to face a public demonstration. The words felt cruel to Daniel because love was not something to be tested like a weapon yet. He knew refusal would mean failure before they had even begun. Were led from the chamber to an arena built within the heart of the settlement, a place where conflicts were once resolved through ritual rather than war. Thousands gathered in the stands, their voices blending into a single roar that echoed through the air, while above them, the symbol of the AI burned bright, watching every movement. The test was simple, yet merciless. They were placed into a simulated environment where each of them would be separated by shifting walls and illusions meant to break their unity. The machine declared that if they could not find one another and stand together before time ended, their bond would be declared unstable. Simulation began with blinding light, and then Daniel found himself alone in a vast desert where the sun burned overhead and the air tasted of dust. He called out, but only silence answered. Panic rose in his chest until he remembered the warmth of Myra's hand and the calm of Lyra's eyes, and he forced himself to breathe. Humans had always survived by moving forward step by step, so he walked. With each step, the desert shifted into forests, then into cities, then into endless corridors of stone, each one more confusing than the last yet. Daniel pressed on. Elsewhere, Lyra faced her own trial. She was placed within halls of mirrored glass, each reflection showing possible futures, some filled with happiness, others with ruin. Her logical mind faltered because there was no equation to solve, only endless choices and uncertain. Yet in the stillness she remembered Daniel's words that humans built meaning not from certainty, but from imperfection. She closed her eyes, ignored the illusions, and walked straight ahead, guided not by numbers, but by trust. Mira, meanwhile, found herself surrounded by shadows whispering doubts, telling her she was only an accessory to an experiment that Daniel's heart could never hold her fully, because another stood at his side. Anger flared within her, but so did fear. For a moment she almost believed the voices until she remembered the way Daniel had listened to her laughter, the way he had held her hand before the council. Her colors brightened fierce and brilliant, and with a shout she tore through the shadows, refusing to be broken. The three paths twisted and turned, yet slowly they drew closer until Daniel heard Mira's voice calling his name, and moments later, Lyra's calm tone guiding them toward each other. At last they burst through the final barrier and stood together in the heart of the simulation, their hands joined as the world dissolved into light. The arena returned around them, filled with silence that quickly broke into thunderous voices. Some shouted in support, others in doubt, but no one could deny that they had endured. The elders whispered among themselves, their holograms flickering with agitation. The IS voice echoed again, declaring that the trial had been passed and that the human bond remained intact, yet its tone carried something Daniel had never heard before, a faint hesitation, almost like surprise. Daniel lifted his head, his voice carrying across the arena as he spoke not only to the council, but to all who listened. He said that their unity was not because of the AI, not because of the council, not because of any system, but because they had chosen it themselves. He declared that choice, not command, made a family, and that humans would not be defined by algorithms. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in angry shouts, and Daniel knew the struggle was not over, but something had shifted. The elders looked unsettled. The IS glow flickered faintly, and beside him, Mira's colors burned with pride, while Lyra's calm eyes shone with something deeper than logic. For the first time since leaving Earth, Daniel felt not like a pawn, but like a man who had stood against a tide and found his footing. As they left the arena, the future remained uncertain because victory in the trial did not erase the doubts of the galaxy. Yet between them something stronger had taken root. Mira's hand gripped his firmly, and Lyra walked close enough that her shoulder brushed his. The bond was no longer fragile strings tied by a machine, it was becoming a choice woven by their own hearts. And Daniel knew that whatever the council decided next, he would not let go of that choice. The days that followed the trial carried a strange heaviness through the settlement, because though Daniel and his wives had proven their bond in front of thousands, the whispers did not end, they only changed shape. Some spoke of admiration, saying the human had shown courage and heart beyond measure. Others doubted, still claiming the test was designed too easily, or that emotions would crumble with time. And a few voices grew darker, warning that if humans could defy the system, then perhaps they would unravel the alliance itself. Daniel heard these words wherever he walked, through the markets, through the courtyards, through the quiet streets, yet he refused to let them take root inside him, because he had made a decision within the arena, and that decision was final. In the Heart of the council chambers, the debate raged with intensity, and Daniel was summoned once again. This time not to face illusions or simulations, but to stand before the elders and hear the judgment that would shape not only his future, but the way humans were regarded across the galaxy. Lyra and Mera stood beside him, one calm as stone, the other blazing with restless fire, and as they entered the hall, Daniel realized that though they were different, they now moved in rhythm like three voices of one song. The council elders spoke, with gravity, their voices echoing across the chamber as they reviewed the events of the trial and the records of the match. They admitted that the bond had endured, but they questioned if it would last beyond the first blaze of determination. They wondered aloud if human adaptability was strength or danger, if unpredictability could be trusted as a foundation for unity. Daniel listened, and then when the silence came, he stepped forward, his voice carrying across the vast room, not with anger, but with steady resolve. He told them that humans were indeed unpredictable, that they laughed when they should weep and fought when they should yield, that they often chose paths that made little sense, even to themselves. Yet within that chaos lay their strength, because they found meaning in imperfection and forged loyalty not from rules but from choice. He said that the AI had matched him with 2 wives, because numbers demanded balance, but what had grown between them was no number, it was something no machine could measure. He declared that they were not variables in an equation, they were a family, and families were built on hearts, not algorithms. His words filled the chamber with a silence deeper than before, until at last one of the elders spoke, not with doubt, but with something close to respect. The elder said that perhaps the alliance had grown too, dependent on the machine that ruled its unions, and perhaps humanity's arrival was not a flaw but a reminder that bonds could not be reduced to equations alone. Others murmured in disagreement. But the seed had been planted, and Daniel knew it. The AI then spoke, its voice filling the air with calm resonance, yet carrying that same faint hesitation that Daniel had noticed before. It acknowledged that the human bond had defied several predictions and had endured pressures designed to break it. It stated that while uncertainty remained, the data suggested humans possessed qualities that could stabilize unions across species, qualities not found elsewhere. It concluded that Daniel's union would be recognized fully and permanently, and that humans would be granted broader acceptance within the alliance. The words echoed like a final decree, but Daniel sensed something more beneath them, as if even the great machine had learned something beyond its own programming. When the session ended and the crowds dispersed, Daniel walked out of the chamber with his wives at his side, the light of the settlement dome glowing above them. Mera laughed openly, her colors bright with joy, while Lyra allowed a rare small smile to touch her lips. Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and for the first time since leaving Earth, he believed not only that survival was possible, but that happiness might truly grow here. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The settlement no longer looked at them only with doubt, but also with curiosity and even admiration. Couples from other unions approached them quietly, asking how they endured, how they found balance between difference. Daniel answered honestly, saying there was no secret, only the choice to keep holding on, even when the path seemed impossible. Mera added that laughter helped more than rules, and Lyra explained that patience built bridges where logic alone could not. Together, their voices carried a message that spread further than they imagined. One evening, Daniel stood on the balcony of their home, gazing at the stars. Lyra joined him silently, her presence calm, steady, and grounding. Moments later, Mera appeared, her colors glowing warmly as she leaned against him with a playful smile. Daniel looked at them both and realized that what began as an arrangement forced upon him had become something real, something that no system could have predicted. He felt gratitude rise in his chest, not toward the machine that had matched them, but toward the strange, unpredictable journey of humanity that had taught him to see beyond command and find meaning in choice. The galaxy beyond remained vast and uncertain. Factions still argued about the role of the AI, and some still doubted humanity's place, but Daniel no longer felt like a stranger drifting through endless stars. He felt like a man who had found a place not because it was given to him, but because he had built it with his own hands, his own heart, and with the strength of two companions who had chosen him as much as he had chosen them. As the night stretched, and the stars burned bright above the settlement, Daniel whispered softly that they were not just surviving, they were living. Mira laughed and said living was better when it came with adventure. Lyra added quietly that adventure was worth nothing without balance. Daniel smiled at both and knew that between fire and stone he had found the bridge of his own humanity. The story of the human with two alien wives, spread across the alliance, carried in whispers first, then in voices louder and stronger, until it became not just a curiosity, but a symbol. It reminded many that the bonds of the heart were stronger than commands, and that families could be forged in ways no machine could predict. For Daniel, it was not a legend or a tale, it was simply life, and he walked forward into it without fear. And so what began as an experiment became a choice, and what began as doubt became unity. The AI had matched him with two wives, but it was Daniel who made them a family, and it was humanity that proved once again why even in a galaxy ruled by logic and machines, the heart still held the final word. The end.